Okay, we're up to the beginning of the fifth parak on Ayin Ches Amud Aleph. So this Mishnah deals with the prohibition of Oisoi Ves Benoi. Oisoi Ves Benoi means that there's an Issa Deraisa to shecht a mother and her child on the same day. So if you have this applies not to just karbanos, stam. If you have a baby cow and a mother cow, and you have a big chasana, and you want to be able to serve a lot of meat, you are not allowed to shech the mother and the child on the same day. So it says the Mishnah, Oisei ves benoi, noig bein ba'aretz ben b'chutz la'aretz. This prohibition applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz la'aretz because it's not related to the land. Mitzvahs that are tali ba'aretz only apply to Eretz Yisrael, like Meiser, Shemitah, and Truma, but things that are chayvis haguf obviously apply in Chutz la'aretz as well. B'chulin u'b'mikdashin, and it applies in Chullin and Kodshim as well. Now, the Mishnah now will, I believe, give 12 cases of how you could have circumstances where you have Oisei ves benai, both applying to Chullin and to Karbanos, sometimes just Chullin, sometimes just Karbanos, combination of the two. And the Mishnah is basically going to be using the following premise, and that is, if you shech Karbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash, it's Chayiv Kares. There's an additional prohibition of shechting a non-carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. Now that's not chayiv kares, that's a bitl aseh. So there's no physical punishment. If it's an aveira, it's a prohibition, but there's no punishment. So says the Mishnah, Keitzad. What are some iterations of Oisei ves benoi? Hasheicher Oisei ves benoi, Chullin b'chutz. You have Chullin, so it's non-carbonos, and both the animals are done outside of the Beis HaMikdash, i.e. the standard situation. Shneim ksherim, you could eat both of them, because even Oisei ves benoi does not make the meat treif, but Hasheni Seivis Aboim, the one who shechted the second one is over in Issa Deraisa. So if you shech the mother and then someone shechs the baby, the one who shechted the baby is over the Issa Deraisa, because he was over the Oisei ves benoi. Case number 2 is Kodshim Achutz. If let's say both the parent and the child animal are both karbanos, and you're shechting them both outside of the Beis HaMikdash, so the halacha is Harishon Chayiv Kares. The first one is Chayiv Kares because it's a carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash. However, the second one is not going to be Chayiv Kares. Why not? I'm shechting, it's also a carbon, I'm shechting outside of the Beis HaMikdash. I'll tell you why. Because once the Isser Chayiv Kares is shechting an eligible carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash. However, because its mother was shechted on that day, that's not eligible as a carbon, hayoim anyway. So therefore, Ushneim Psulim, both are going to be possible. Ushneim Soifix Aboim. The first one is going to be Chayiv Kares, and you're going to get lashes for shechting outside of the Beis HaMikdash. But the second one is going to get lashes for... The second one is going to get lashes for Oisei ves benoi. Again, it's not going to be Chayiv Kares because it wasn't eligible, even though it's a carbon and it's outside the Beis HaMikdash, because once its parent was shechted that day, it's not Roy for Hakrava that day. It's sort of like it's a puzzle carbon for that day. Case number 3 is Chullin b'fnim. Both animals, both the parent and the child, are Chullin, and they're shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash. Now there's a Isser Aseh of shechting Chullin inside the Beis HaMikdash, so Shneim Psulim. So because of that, both are going to be puzzle. Both are going to be an issue because they're both shechted of Chullin and the Azara. But the second one is going to get lashes for Oisei ves benoi. The first one doesn't get lashes because there's no lashes for shechting Chullin and the Azara. The fourth case, Kodshim b'fnim. If both animals are karbanos and they're both shechted in the Beis HaMikdash. So the first one is what you're supposed to do. It's a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. Harishon kasher u'pater. Hasheni Seivis Abayim Pasul. The second one is an issue because it was not eligible to be brought that day because it's Oisei ves benoi, so it's a puzzle carbon, and you get lashes for Oisei ves benoi. Case number 5, Chullin v'kodshim b'chutz. Now these next 4 cases are going to be a combination where the Oisei and es benoi, the parent and the child, one is Chullin, one is the kodshim. Chullin v'kodshim b'chutz. So the first animal is Chullin, and it was shechted outside in the proper spot. And the second animal is a carbon, and it was shechted outside, not in the proper spot. So Harishon kasher pata. The first animal is kosher because it's Chullin outside of the Beis HaMikdash, which is what it's supposed to be. The second one is soifik arbaim upasel. The second one gets lashes, and it's puzzle. The second one gets lashes, it's puzzle because it's carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and you get lashes for Oisei ves benoi. Now, the sixth case is Kodshim b'chulin b'chutz, which is the reverse. They're both shechted outside, but the first carbon that was shechted outside was a carbon. The second one was a Chullin. So the Rishon Chayiv Kares, the first one is Chayiv Kares because it's a carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash that was eligible to be brought inside, upasal. Vasheni kasher. Now the second one is Chullin, so it's allowed to be shechted outside. But Shneim Seifik Zaboim, but it's going to get lashes. The first one is going to get lashes for carbonos outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and the second one is going to get lashes for Oisei ves benoi. Case number 7 is Chullin v'kodshim b'fnim. The first animal is Chullin, and it was shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash. Wrong spot. The second animal is Kachim, and it was shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash, in the proper spots. The halacha is Shneim Psulim. Both are possible. Why? The first one is possible because it was Chullin shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash, so you can't eat it. The second one is possible because Oisay Ves Benoi invalidates it. And the second one is going to get lashes for Oisay Ves Benoi. Always the second one gets lashes for Oisay Ves Benoi. Case number 8, Kachim Bechulin Bifnim. The first animal was Kachim, and it was shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash, in the proper spot. The second one was Chullin, it was shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash, wrong spot. So Arishan Kasher Upata, the first animal is kosher and it's brought in the proper spot, that's fine. Hasheni Seif is impossible, but the second one is invalid because it's Chullin inside the Beis HaMikdash, so it's invalid, you can't eat it, and you get lashes for Yisai Ves Benai. Now, Chullin Bachutz Ubefnim. So now the last 4 cases are the same type of animal, Yisai Ves Benai, both being Chullin or both being Kachim, but the first one is shechted in the different spot than the second. So that both cases, case number 9 is both the animals are Chullin. But the first one was shechted outside of the Beis HaMikdash in the proper spot, and the second was shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash in the wrong spot. So Arishan Kasher Patel, the first one is proper. Hasheni Sevis Abayim possible. The second one, which is Chullin Bifnim, is invalid, and you get lashes. Case number 10. Kodshim b'chutz b'fnim. Both are karbanos, but the first one is shechted outside the Beis HaMikdash in the wrong spot. The second one was shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash in the right spot, but so vesmano. So harishon chayiv kares. The first one is going to chayiv kares because it's a carbon that was shechted outside the Beis HaMikdash that was eligible to be brought inside. Ushneim seifis aboim, ushneim sulim, but both are invalid. Why? The first one's invalid because it's chutei chutz, and you get lashes for that. The second one is invalid because of oisei vesbenai, and you get lashes for oisei vesbenai. Last 2 cases of the Mishnah, Chullin b'fnei u'bachutz. Both animals are Chullin. The first one was shechted inside, which is not where it's supposed to be, and the second was shechted outside. So halacha is harisha in pasal u'pater. The first one is invalid because it's a Chullin inside the azara, but no lashes. Hasheni seif is abayim u'pasher. The second one is going to be kosher because it was shechted outside. It's Chullin shechted outside, but it's oisei vesbenai, so you get lashes. And the last case is Kodshim Bifnim B'chutz. The last case is both animals are karbanos. The first one was shechted inside in the proper spot, and the second was shechted outside in the wrong spot. Harishan Kasher Potter. Hasheni Savis Abayim Upasal. The second one is the only thing that did wrong was Shchutei Chutz and Oisei Vesbenai, so it's pasal and you get lashes. Okay. Now the Gemara says like this: Tan Rabbanan. We said in the Mishnah that Oisei Ves Benai applies to Chullin and Karbanos as well. How do you know that Oisei Ves Benai applies to Karbanos? Maybe there's no Isser of shechting a mother and its child when they're both Karbanos. So Tam Loimai, the pasuk says Shara Kesa Ve'ez Kiva Leid. Now that's a pasuk. That's a pasuk in in Perak Yud Chaf Beis of Vayikra, pasuk Chav Zayin. Now that's a pasuk relating to Karbanos. It says Shara Kesa Ve'ez Kiva Leid, that it has to be 8 days old to be a carbon. So that pasuk is talking about Karbanos. And the next pasuk, it says, V'shara Oisei Ves Benai lo yishchatu b'yom echad. The next pasuk talks about Oisei Ves Benai. So the juxtaposition of pasuk Chav Zayin, which is Karbanos, to pasuk Chav Ches, which is Oisei Ves Benai, tells you that Oisei Ves Benai applies to Karbanos as well. Limer Oisei Ves Benai sh'nav g'doshim. So the Gemara says, great. Then how do you know that Oisei Ves Benai applies to non-Karbanos? You just made a drasha saying that it applies to Karbanos. Maybe it only applies to Karbanos. Maybe there is no Oisei Ves Benai Isser when it's not a Karban. So the Gemara says, sure. I'll tell you why. The first pasuk is Karbanos, but then the next pasuk begins Vishar Oisei Ves Benai. The words Vishar, it's unnecessary because you could just say Se Oisei Ves Benai. So what is Vishar? It's being mafsik. It's separating the 2 psukim, and it's saying that although the previous pasuk was talking about Karbanos, this next pasuk is not exclusively about Karbanos. It's even by Chullin. So says the Gemara, okay, Be'ema b'Chullin in Mukdash lo. But now we back to the same question, which is if the word Shar is separating the 2 psukim, that means that the second pasuk of Oisei Ves Benai is not necessarily connected to the first pasuk. So then how do you know it applies to Karbanos as well? The only reason why it applies to Karbanos is because of the juxtaposition of the psukim. And now that you're telling me that the word shar separates, then you're back to the original question. How do you know it applies to Karbanos as well? So the Gemara says, Ksiv vishar vav ma'isef alei nirishon. It says vishar, the vav. So the previous pasuk is talking about Karbanos. The next pasuk, it says shar, which is mafsik, means that it's even talking about Chullin, but it says vishar, which connects it. So it's connected and not connected. In what way? So it's connected to the previous pasuk that it applies to Karbanos, but it's not just connected to the previous pasuk because it applies to non-Karbanos as well. Now, the Gemara is saying that now that you've established that Oisei Ves Benai applies to Karbanos because of its juxtaposition of a shar, then ima kodshim klayim loy af Oisei Ves Benai klayim loy. So if that's the case, then I should have the following halacha. Let's say it's a parent and a child, but it's a hybrid. So let's say the parent, the mother is the mother is what's an example of a hybrid? I'm not sure. I can't think of an example of a sheep or a goat. Okay, whatever. So let's say the mother's a sheep, the father's a goat, and they have a child. So the halacha is that child is not roy as a korban. You cannot have a korban that's brought from a crossbreed. So if that's the case, and you're telling me there's a connection to karbanos and osovos bano, then maybe I should be able to shech the mother and its child, even if the child's a hybrid. But the halacha is not like that. Allah Matanya, the Brisa says, Osov es beno, noi beklayim bekoi. The halacha is that Osov es beno applies to klayim, it also applies to koi. Koi is unclear what type of animal it is. So safik chay is safik behema. But bekitzer, it applies to klayim. But if the question is, why should it apply to klayim? If you're going to compare it to kachim, it should be like kachim, that it does not apply to hybrids. And I have another reason why it should not apply to hybrids. Sexiv, it says in the pasuk, shar oy seh. Now it says sheep. Now, the halach is actually sheep and a goat. I don't think is a case of hybrid. Whatever the case of hybrids are. So it says seh, right? The V'amar Rava, go to the next page. Zebana Rava says we have a rule throughout the Torah. Kol makom shenemer seh ein ela hotzias haklayim. Anytime the word seh is written in the Torah, it's to exclude hybrids. So we have two reasons why Osov es beno should not apply to hybrids. First of all, the connection to karbanos, and karbanos did not apply to hybrids. And secondarily, because it says seh, and seh is always excluding hybrids. So how do you know that Osov es beno applies to a hybrid as well? To klayim. Amakra oy. The Rabbi Saklayim. It says shar oy seh. Oy is to include hybrids. Says the Gemara, I thought oy is already used for something else. Hi oy mi boile l'chalik. I thought oy is used to tell me something else. What was it used to tell me? The selkat. You might think ad shachit shar ubenoi. Se ubenoi loy mechayiv kamash malon. The pasuk says shar oy se oy soy ves benoi. If not for the word oy, we're saying the word oy is coming extra to tell me to include hybrids. I thought oy is coming to tell me something else. What is it coming to tell me? The way the pasuk is written, without the word oy, it would sound like you're only chayiv, you're only over an iser, not just for shechting a shar and its child, or a seh and its child. You might have to shecht all of it. A shar, oy seh, oy soy ves benoi, meaning you might have to shecht an ox and its child and a sheep and its child. All four animals. The word oy tells me no. An ox and its child is one iser, a sheep and its child is another iser. So oy is not extra. Oy is telling me that you don't have to do all of them. So the Gemara says, "Mechalik bibnoi nafka." The way I know that you don't have to do all four animals is from the word benoi. Oisayv as benoi. I guess it could have said. Benoi. I guess it could have said ben. I guess the word benoi tells you that you don't have to do all four animals, and therefore oy is extra to tell me that to include a hybrid. Says the Gemara, but don't we need it anyway? The word oy is used for something else. It's not used to include a hybrid. Ilu nemer shar v'seh ubenoi hayisi oy ma'achi yishchat shar v'seh ubenoi tamlemer shar oyseh oysay ves benoi my lav ma'oy nafgalei. Doesn't the Brisa say that the word oy is coming to tell me? The pasuk says shar oyseh oyseh ves benoi. So we're saying right now, even without the word oy, I would know you don't have to shecht a shar and its child and a seh and its child. So oy is coming to include a hybrid. The Gemara says that's not true. Without the word oy, I would have thought that you have to shecht three animals. Shar, an ox, and then a seh and a sheep, and the seh's child. So I wouldn't think you'd have to shecht four animals, the ox and its child and the sheep and its child, but I would think you'd have to shecht an ox and a sheep and its child, three animals. Says the Gemara, no, the fact that you don't have to shech three animals is from oisai, that it's one pair, a parent and its child. The word oy is extra to include a hybrid. So the Gemara says, Hani chalaman l'rabbanan d'mi'ater l'oisai, el chananya d'mi'ater oisai l'chalik minolei. The problem is, as we'll see in a few moments, Chananya uses the word oisai to tell me that oisai ves benoi applies to males and not just females. As we'll see in a moment, it's a machlokes. Everyone agrees that you cannot shecht a mother and its child. What about a father and its child? It's a machlokes. Chananya uses the word oisai to tell me that the prohibition applies to a father as well. So I don't have the word oisai to tell me you don't have to shech three animals you only have to shech two to be over the iser because oisai is used for something else, which means we're back to the original problem. The word oi is no longer extra to include a hybrid. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the answer. L'chalek leitzarech kra. The answer is oi is taka used for a hybrid. I thought oi was coming to separate that you don't have to shecht four animals. Shar oiseh oisai ves benai. So the Gemara says that's not a problem at all. There's a general rule throughout Shas. The Savarlaka Rabbi Yonasan. There's a machlekes of Yonasan and Rabbi Yoshia throughout Shas. When the Torah describes certain situations, does that mean that do we start off that it's separate until you're told otherwise, or do we start off that it's inclusive until you're told otherwise? If you follow Rabbi Yonasan, the approach is it's always separate until you're told otherwise. So when the pasuk says Shar oiseh oisai ves benai, Rabbi Yonasan's thought is separate. I don't have to do all four until I'm told otherwise. Rabbi Yoshia disagrees, but according to Rabbi Yonasan, I don't need a pasuk to tell me you don't have to do all four animals. I don't have to do an ox and its child and a sheep and its child, because my go-to is Shar oiseh oisai ves benai. The vav is always separate according to Rabbi Yonasan, and therefore I don't need a pasuk, the word oi, coming to tell me that it's separate. Therefore, oi is inclusive, is extra to tell me a hybrid. The Gemara says, Tanya, what is this machlokes? We've had this machlokes many times. It's related to the pasuk. It says, Isha sheikalas avaves imai. The pasuk says that a man who will curse his father and his mother. The question is, does that mean and or? Does that mean that a person has to curse both his father and his mother to be chayav the death penalty? Or? So ainly aviv imai, aviv shlei imai, v'iv shlei ammenai, and tam lemer aviv imai kilel, aviv kilel, imai kilel. Div Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia says, again, Rabbi Yoshia shita is everything's inclusive until told otherwise. So he says, ish ashi kalas aviv imai. That means you have to curse both. How do I know that you're chayav for cursing one? There's a separate pasuk that says aviv imai kilel. But according to Yoshi, you need the other pasuk because to him it's always inclusive. So he would actually look at Isai Ves Benai the same way. You have to shecht a shar and its child and a san and its child until you're told otherwise. Comes Rabbi Yonasan, Rabbi Yonasan says no. Mashmash name kecha and mashma echa b'fnei atzmai shilcha kasav yachtav. Yonasan says no. When the pasuk lists multiple things with vavs in between, they're not inclusive until you're told otherwise. They're always separate. So I know that when it says Isha shekilas aviv ima, you don't have to curse both. It's or, it's not and. So to over here, it's a shar and its child, or a se and its child, rendering the word oso extra to include a hybrid. Now we said before that there was a side machlokes that the word osai is going to be used for, that oi is used for a hybrid, and osai was related to the machlokes Chanani and the Rabbanan. So what is that machlokes I mentioned before? It's a machlokes related to whether oisai ves benai applies to males as well. The Gemara speaks it out. My Chanani, my Rabbanan. What is this machlokes? The Tanya. Oisai ves benai noig ben nekeves. For sure, there's an isser of shechting a mother and its child. So a mother animal and its child, either a son or a daughter, is for sure asur deraisa. Eina noig b'scharim. It says the Rabbanan does not apply to fathers. You're allowed to shech the father and its child. As the Gemara is going to explain, the pasuk. We'll see in a moment the sources. Chanani disagrees. He says, no, noig bein schar ben nekevis. It applies to a father and its child and a mother and its child. Either one is over the isser of the reis of Isai ves benai. My time in the Rabbanon. What's the Rabbanon source that it does not apply to a father? The Tanya. Yachal Isai ves benai noig bein b'schar ben nekevis. You might think that applies to the father as well. V'dinhu. And the Gemara says, well, I have a svara that could tell you otherwise. What's the svara? Meaning, it says chayiv kan, v'chayiv be'em al banim. The Gemara says, I have a source of why it does not apply to the father, and it's from a svara. What's the svara? We know there's an isser deraisa of Isai ves benai. We also know there's an isser of taking a mother bird off of the nest. Just like the mother bird only applies to the mother bird, it does not apply to the father. You're allowed to take the father bird if it's sitting on top of the eggs. There's no isser. It only applies to the mother. So therefore, it's a svara to say that Isai ves benai applies to the mother as well. So I don't have a source for it, says the Rabbanan. It's just a svara. It's learned out from Shluch HaKan. Says the Gemara Lo im Amr be'em al banim sheken lo yasa b'mezumim she'en mezumim. The problem, the Gemara says, you can't learn it out from Shluch HaKan. Why? Because Shluch HaKan only applies to nests that are hefker. This is a shayla that I get a lot, which is mezumin. The halacha is that if a nest is owned by you, you're not able to do the mitzvah Shluch HaKan. So, I mean, obviously, a classic case is if you actually own the nest. The Paiskim nowadays would say that this applies even if you're not aware that you own the nest, but it's on your chutzner, so chutzner is kind of shleimidaita, fine. But bekitzer, it only applies to ownerless nests. Oisai Vesbenai applies to ownerless animals and non-ownerless animals. So you can't learn out from Shluch HaKan that it only applies to the mothers, because Shluch HaKan has its own halachas. Talmud Loimar, and therefore the pasuk says, Oisai. Oisai means echad v'lishnayim. Oisai means that it only applies to one pair of parents. Oisai is singular. It applies to a parent, either a mother and its child or a father and its child. Now, which one? So now the Gemara says, I know now from the word Oisai that it does not apply to both parents. It only applies to one. It could either apply to the mother and its child or the father. Now that I know it only applies to one, now I could go with logic. Chayv kan v'chayv beim albonim. Just like the Gemara says like this, I wouldn't be able to learn it from Shulchan Khan outright, but now that I have a pasuk that tells me Oisai that it only applies to one thing, it's singular, therefore now I know that if it only applies to one, I'll compare it to Shluch HaKam, that it only applies to the mothers and not the fathers. Now says the Gemara, and if you want another source that it only applies to the mothers, I have another source, as we'll see in a moment, because this source is not that stark. I have another source to tell me. So the first source that it applies to mothers only is because oso, which is singular, implying only one parent, and logically we'll go with mother. Another source, benoi. The pasuk says benoi, its son, the animal's son. Misha benoi karach achrav. That implies that the isser is shechting an animal who's very connected to the son. Which one of the parents is the son more connected to, the father and the mother? The mother, obviously, because not just because emotional, but it feeds and it nurses from the mother. So benoi misha benoi karach acharav yatsa zachar she'ein benoi karach acharav. So that excludes the father. So there's two sources that applies to the mother. What is Isai singular, and there logically it makes sense that it will be the mother, or benoi misha benoi karach acharav, which is the mother, not the father. What do I need two sources for? What was the issue with oso? Bechitem oso zachar mash. Because I'll tell you why. Oso is singular. That only applies to one, and then you logically want it to apply to the mother. The problem is Isai is masculine. So I would actually say oso is more applicable to the father. Therefore, there's a second source, bino, misha, bino, karachachav, yasazach, Hashem, bino, karachachav. Now, that's all the Rabbanan Shita that only applies to the mother. Hanania believes it applies to the mother and the father. We'll end with this. Ul Hanania, how does he know this? Because he says, oso. Oso is masculine, which means the father. And then it says bino, which is beno, right? We said before oso is singular, but it's also masculine. So masculine implies the father. Beno implies the parent that the child is most connected to, which is the mother. So I have a source for father and mother. Put it together. It applies to both the mother and the father. I will stop here.